I'm here with Joseph Abadi from Princeton University. Just got done giving a presentation. Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, sure, yeah, no, great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, man. So you just want to, we kind of went over this a little bit, by the way, and again, I apologize again for making us kind of rehash this, but can you just kind of tell us what you talked about in there and kind of what your thesis is and what you were here to kind of present?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we talked about is a new blockchain trilemma, which is like an economic blockchain trilemma. So what we show is that no digital record-keeping system can simultaneously have the following three properties. First is resource efficiency, by which I mean that essentially there's no proof of work. Mm-hmm. Second is no rent extraction, which basically is like decentralization.
Sure.
And then third is self-sufficiency, which means that the system doesn't rely on any external sources of trust that exist outside of the blockchain. So for example, like with proof of stake, you typically need some external trust to ensure that you're getting the right checkpoint from your friend if you're a new user. So yeah, I mean, I think that this has important implications for how we think about designing blockchains in the future, because it tells you, okay, what are the different types of incentive schemes that we can use to make sure our ledger is secure.
Sure.
And importantly, it also tells us that the sort of external trust that we need to have to make something like proof of stake work is very different from the sort of centralized trust that we need for centralized ledgers. Mm-hmm. And we can have a secure ledger where I only trust my few friends and someone else on the other side of the world only trusts their few friends, and I can still transact with someone on the other side of the world, which is sort of revolutionary from the point of view of how record keeping has traditionally worked.
Sure. And we talked about that just a few seconds ago. We kind of talked about, again, and just kind of summarizing that for me and how I would comprehend that is, there is fundamentally a difference between obviously proof of work and proof of stake, and it's possible that the actual world that we live in does not require a full hardcore proof of work model. Yeah. And that, because if we think about, as you were talking about, kind of like Ripple with the validators, I trust certain individuals and I can transact with them, and if they know people that I don't know, but that they trust, then there's no reason that I can't send that transaction directly to the individuals. Mm-hmm. Not even that I need to go through the people that I trust and then they send it there. I can just send directly to the person I don't trust because I basically have a letter, so to speak, from somebody that I do trust that they're trustworthy.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I know. So I mean, as you said, I think that proof of work is a very extreme solution. Using proof of work really means acknowledging the fact that we effectively don't have any social trust.
Right.
So like when our social system is completely fractured or the government is interfering with our social connections to make sure we can't get any information from our contacts,
sure,
then we might want to use proof of work. But in the real world, especially in like almost any developed country, the amount of trust we need to get something like proof of stake to work or Ripple to work is really minimal.
Right.
Like, all you need to do is be able to trust that like your friends aren't actively attacking the blockchain and creating 10,000 nodes to trick you, which I think
Sure.
is a pretty reasonable assumption for most relationships that we have.
Now, you were talking about how the only, potentially, and I don't want to say only, so don't allow me to put words in your mouth, but potentially proof of work would be a better solution should we exist in a scheme where society has fallen apart, government has become absolutely malfeasant or tyrannical. Yeah. Is it possible, would you say that perhaps the base layer of which currencies, which all nation states need, or individuals need to transact with one another and transmit value, would you say that the base layer, or that maybe we should have a base layer? Because my conception has always been, I agree with your point. I think that there are absolutely, because look at Ethereum. Ethereum is proof of work, but there are many, that's a bad example, but there are many proof of stake systems, delegated proof of stake systems that work right now, and that haven't had massive security breaches, and that can transact value, and that have millions of dollars locked up on their chains. But do you think it's important to potentially have one or a base layer that is kind of universal, and I'm kind of talking about Bitcoin, that exists and is there in case of nuclear war, in case that does happen, because we have seen throughout history, social structure completely collapse. We have seen governments turn tyrannical. Right. We have seen the kind of need for that, where you can't trust anybody. So would you say that? I just your opinions on that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it could potentially be a solution, but there's also a complication, which is a base layer that basically extends to the whole world economy on some level has to be extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. Just because, the incentives to steal money out of that base layer would be enormous.
Sure,
and
course.
Basically, economically, really it has to be that the cost of stealing is less than the cost of just extending the ledger. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that makes that type of proof of work base layer dangerous is that, what if we get into a situation where we are in a war and a government decides that they just want to take over the base layer?
Sure.
So as of right now, for the US to take over Bitcoin, for example, would be a very minor rounding error on the annual budget. So yeah, again, it would really have to be a really big system in order to ensure that like big governments with the incentives to manipulate this thing wouldn't have the incentive to take it over.
Sure. So maybe something, so not a universal system potentially, but so are you kind of suggesting many smaller localized systems?
Yeah, potentially that would be a better solution, because then it's more robust in the sense that if one of them goes down, then the rest are safer. And yeah, I mean, just in terms of the economic costs, it could potentially save on the fact that you need to incentivize people not to steal small amounts of money rather than the world's wealth.
Cool. And again, so with that kind of thought and feeling about everything, did you have any examples, or and again, I don't want you to speak to like valuation or investment or anything like that, but are there any projects out there that are kind of doing it right in your opinion, or at least are neat or interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, so like, I would say that, I mean, any project that's trying to just sort of leverage the type of social trust that we have is interesting to me.
Sure.
So like, I think Ripple is the most basic example. And yeah, their idea is what we talked about earlier, that we all just need to trust a few people, and at the end of the day, we can have a secure, like almost global ledger if we manage to scale it. And yeah, I mean, so anything like that, I think, has potential. And then, the question at the end of the day to me is just, how can we most efficiently use that social trust that exists? So, how can we design our consensus algorithm to create the, minimum incentive to lie to people who you may or may not trust? So yeah, I mean, I think the jury's still out on how we're going to do that and whether we can scale it, but I think that there's a lot of potential.
Cool. So again, I like that concept though. I mean, honestly, cryptocurrency is one of those fields where you can kind of go a lot of places with it. Coming in, obviously you have your cypherpunk area, you have your computer science area, you have your theoretical area, you have your economic area, and every different little sector kind of attracts different people, because all of those things were their own fields before cryptocurrency brought all these weird bedfellows, to put it in a certain sense. What do you feel is, and so I kind of like your statement that, listen guys, almost this is how I'm interpreting it, the world isn't that bad. Like, we can trust each other. Like, just chill out, man. Like, we can come up with something a little bit better. What's kind of the most interesting development in cryptocurrency right now, in your opinion?
So I mean, honestly, I mean, just in terms of how we think about digital currencies, I mean, I don't know if you'd count it as a cryptocurrency, but I would love to see if private companies are able to issue their own money.
Yeah.
So for example, I mean, these days, it, like the Libra project seems more up in the air, but yeah, I think it'd just be really interesting to see if we can go back to what we had like in the 1850s, where private institutions were issuing their own money all over the place. And whether today we can make it more trustworthy, because these monies are linked to businesses that already have enormous value, rather than tiny regional banks that had an incentive to run away with people's money.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, just from the perspective of monetary economics, understanding whether this is possible is hugely important. I don't know if it's going to be beneficial or detrimental, but yeah, I mean, I think there's just enormous interest in figuring out whether it can actually work.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I have the opinion that corporate coins, as we kind of like to call them, would be wildly successful. Kind of the big question is, as you said, up in the air, in my opinion, is, will they toe the government's line enough? Because, from a deeper fundamental level, and again, could just be my speculation, of course, but there is this underlying issue between, central bank digital assets, which is, I feel, where governments want to take things. Governments have, largely worldwide, wanted to get rid of cash for a long time because it's pesky for them. It's not verifiable. You can do illegal transactions with it. It's hard to manage. It's hard to confiscate. All of these things. So digital money is obviously the no-brainer. So you kind of have, in my opinion, this standoff where corporate coins want to do it with the private market, and governments are on the fence because on one section, obviously in a capitalist country like America, you have a government that favors, and sometimes private market, well, in general, private market approaches to solving problems. They're like, yes, let the private market solve it. They generally do a good job. And if we need to step in, we will, and we'll step in to a degree to make sure that everything's equitable and fair. And then, you also have the government who has to ask themselves, is this just the private market solving an economic solution? Or is this the private market attempting to take away sovereign power of the government in the form of fiat issuance? Which is interesting because it's only been that way since the 1920s, the 1930s, that central government has had that sovereign power, going back, kind of predating, jumping back in history like 400 years. Yeah. So we went to the founding of America and the issuance of, as you said, what corporate coins are trying to do now. So privately issued currencies, and that was a technological jump. And then it's almost like we went back in time, going back to King Fiat, let it be, with the issuance of centrally controlled central bank assets. Yeah. And so I think, for me anyways, I think that the kind of issue is, are we going to get the jury's out. It's a really interesting question. Yeah. Ultimately the decision comes down to the governments. Do they feel that this is a private market solution to liquidity or capital, or is this a direct attack on government sovereignty? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, so I think that the question is actually pretty complicated, in particular because, the government, I think, ultimately might feel like it's an attack on their sovereignty, but the thing that's going to happen is that, a lot of private digital currency or corporate coins are going to be attached to, systemically important platforms.
Sure.
So like in China, Alibaba's already doing this.
Yep, WeChat. Yep.
Yeah, WeChat too. And in a world where every big important tech platform has currency attached to it, I don't know how much the government would be able to tell these companies, like, you can't do this anymore.
Right.
And I think, issuing central bank digital currency would be something that they would need to do to defend themselves.
Right.
Because otherwise, cash would just lose competitiveness with this stuff that you can send all over the world, and that you need to use in order to use any sort of platform that you're on.
It also kind of creates, honestly, if that is the case, if corporate coins are able to take off, which I think if they get out of the gate, if they let the genie out of the box, I think they will succeed. I think it's very difficult for them not to. It's if you can go into Facebook Messenger and start sending all your cash, as an employer, if I can pay all my employees through Facebook Messenger now, and it's all and then I can just send that CSV to my account and then it's done. Please, I'm so tired of spreadsheets. Then I think it's a no-brainer. That also, kind of where's the friction in that environment too, I wonder, because if you have WeChat, Alipay, Facebook, Twitter, all of them with their own currencies, what is going to be are you going to have cross-chain interoperability? What is going to be the medium of exchange from, man, I got my friend's over on Twitter and I need to pay him over on Twitter. He doesn't like Facebook. I got $1,000 of Facebook coin. I got to send how do I get over to Twitter coin, right? That's the central bank digital asset, most likely.
Exactly.
That's the medium of exchange and possibly a use case for them. So if you're listening, Mr. Trump, write that one down. All right, that one's free.
That's another huge question. What you're talking about is basically the interoperability of platforms, and each platform that issues its own currency has an incentive basically to prevent other people from using their currency from other platforms on their platform, because they want to gain more market share, and by closing themselves off, they force people onto their platform.
Right, naturally.
This is actually already happening in Kenya. So there's a lot of mobile money being used, and there are various mobile companies that each have their own token. And the Kenyan government actually had to come in and force them to offer interoperability, because you had little villages in Kenya, each which used different mobile companies' money.
Right.
And basically they didn't want to offer interoperability, and this created huge barriers to trade between those villages, and the government had to force that. At the end of the day. And what some people say might happen is that the central bank will have to come in and force tech companies to have interoperability with central bank digital currency, which as an application of central bank digital currency makes a lot of sense. And that would also potentially force them to maintain basically like a one-to-one peg versus the dollar, which is desirable from a regular's point of view as well.
Another thing that I don't think people talk about is liquidity. So right now we have a massive pool of liquidity in the form of USD, which is, 97%, 98, probably 99, because Fight Club was made, about like a decade ago, and everybody gets the statistic from the movie Fight Club. Like a very, very small percentage of cash is physical, meaning it is all digital already. But that still is a pool of liquidity, right? Like at the end of the day, people say that money is fake, money isn't real. At the end of the day, when you are a commercial bank, when you are an investment bank, and you are calling over, the digital number in that account is either large or small enough, right? It's it's either. So money is real. Every single dollar is owed to somebody by somebody. Right. So I often wonder if we see a significant adoption of corporate coins, and we see, so in that sense, I see that as a massive shift in liquidity or holding of capital from a very liquid asset, USD, to a different liquid asset. So even if it's a liquid asset and you could easily convert back and forth, let's say the government does come in and demand interoperability, as we were talked about, what does that do to, what does that do to nation state funding? What does that do to the liquidity that the government is able to kind of throw around, what I mean, without pushing us toward a risk of, well, we don't have liquidity right now, so we're just going to have to print money.
Yeah. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, at least in the early stages, these corporate coins are going to have some sort of peg to the dollar.
Sure.
Because I mean, if not, I think that they're just not going to be able to be adopted because they're just not going to be liquid enough, as you're saying. Like, and the big question then is, though, if the monetary system shifts towards corporate coins, even if they are pegged to the dollar, that's still a very different monetary system, because now the ones in charge of creating money aren't banks, they're tech companies. And tech companies aren't involved in the creation of credit. So the typical linkages that we think of between money and credit in the economy and the way that a tiny amount of cash and reserves gets turned into a huge amount of money, those don't operate anymore in a world where the money is issued by tech companies that are backing their issuance of money 100% with US dollars that they hold in accounts.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it would be essentially like a world that turns the structure of the monetary system on its head, and it has important implications for liquidity, which seem like it would end up with probably less production of money than we have now in a world where money is being created by banks.
Sure.
And whether that's good or bad is just a different matter. I'm not sure anybody knows.
Gotcha. Well, Joseph, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, not really. Other than to say that, this conference has been great, and I hope it continues for several years.
Yeah, good. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time, my good friend.
Yeah,
and thank you so much for your words, man. So.